Hey guys, it's Khalil and Luka again with Star Wars politics. We're moving on from Ryloth. We might return to it um, and just kind of expanding on the Bad Batch arc with like after Imperial presence and about how the peacekeeping rules changed a bit. But that's a topic for another day. Right now, we wanted to expand on what we suggested on what we transitioned to in the last couple minutes of the last discussion, and about the peace negotiation arc in season 3 of Clone Wars. Now, this arc, the two episodes, season 3, episode 10 and 11, episode 10, under the name of Heroes on Both Sides, and 11 being, um,
Pursuit of Peace,
yeah,
something like
Pursuit of
that.
Peace, right? And so with this arc, there is an option. Interestingly enough, if you look at it on a macro level, what happens really in this little arc here is a decision between expanding the war or ending it. And what we see is an option to add more clones, more droids on both sides of the conflict, or as Padme would pursue during this arc, a negotiation with the Separatist side to end the war and end the suffering of the military um, um, personnel as well as the people caught in the crossfire. So we begin the arc with a discussion. Well, like after the Senate procedure and where like where like the expansion of the war is suggested. Um, the Senate procedure ends, and we see Padme walking down the hall, obviously, as you see with Anakin and with Ahsoka, and they talk about, in general, why the war happens. Like they take the opportunity here to talk about why they are at war, um, and uh, and we see a very fundamental difference in understanding between the two different types of peacekeepers. Anakin being a soldier trying to bring the war to an end as fast as possible through winning battles, and Padme, as we would see later on in the arc, by pursuing a peace negotiation model through diplomacy. So, so Luca, why don't you expand on that?
Yeah, so in this specific scene, as you mentioned, they just come out of the Senate, and Padme is obviously against the bill to add an additional 5 million clones, which would exacerbate the war effort, right? And here she discusses with Anakin the role of Jedi in this cause, and she advises him to basically negotiate and talk to the chancellor about it. And he says it's not the Jedi's role to be this into politics. However, his Padawan Ahsoka says that in her perspective it is the role of the Jedi to speak their minds and advise the politicians on what to do in these scenarios, right? And obviously, Anakin begs to differ, and that's where the conflict kind of starts, where Ahsoka and Padme go on this journey to visit a separatist, an old friend of Padme's called Bonteri. And Ahsoka is kind of part of this Republican propaganda, as in she's been influenced, where she believes that the separatists are all wrong. And she kind of has zero faith in them. But Padme actually illuminates that a lot of these separatist senators were part of the Republic at first, and that's where she has so many friends that are actually separatists. So, as the title, heroes on both sides alludes, is that actually both sides have the same goal, just different means to achieve it. So, as we continue, both of them in secrecy travel to visit Bonteri to negotiate a peace agreement upon both sides, where instead of a new bill that would pay for 5 million additional clones, they'd find a compromise to reduce the war effort, which is really, really important, right? However, Ahsoka starts to realize that there is, that the separatists, she wants to understand why the separatists even want to begin peace negotiations, because in her mind, as a Jedi, as someone who fights against the separatists, she only believes that they want war, that the Jedi, the Republic, are the true heroes in this conflict, So it was very interesting to see the separatist side of things, because they believe that the Republic is corrupt. Having true, in hindsight, we know that Emperor Palpatine is the one manipulating both sides. So actually, both sides are corrupt. And while Senator Amidala or should I say Representative Amidala and Bonteri come to an agreement to get each of their senates to pursue peace, we see this in the next scene where Bonteri comes to the Senate of the Separatists and introduces this new bill, this peace agreement, to, on their side, also not, because they're also discussing a bill to add additional 3 million droids to their army, a new bill that would stop this ongoing war, contemporary. And we see Count Dooku is the Speaker of the House, is their version of the Chancellor, which we know he's a puppet for Palpatine. So truthfully, both sides are corrupt in itself, right? They have the same goal, but both are corrupt, meaning they won't actually achieve their goal. There won't be peace. But as it goes, we've also noticed that this house has been inspired by the House of Commons, the English Parliament, right? With the green seats, and obviously the resemblance is uncanny. But back to the topic is that there's this conflict of interest, in a sense, that where both actually, they want peace, however the means of it is kind of stopping them from achieving it. And whilst in the end Bonteri manages to achieve at least a bill that would support this peace thesis, right? The majority of the Senate of Separatist votes on that, and is actually in support for peace negotiations, which actually not only, it really shows the democracy behind both sides, but in this case, this is before we know what the Republic votes on. But it actually shows that the Separatists are actually willing to negotiate peace, and it shows Ahsoka that actually these Separatists, they also want peace, and they're open, more open actually than the Republic, as of we've seen, because so far the Separatists are the only ones willing to negotiate peace instead of war. So with that, I want to go back to Khalil. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm kind of looking at the original motion to add more more clones and more droids into the conflict, because originally the first scene that we see before this dialogue between Anakin, Ahsoka, and Padme, there is the Senate procedure itself, and where they begin talking about that expansion, and now I'm now realizing that could actually be seen as as um a moment in and of itself of potential peacekeeping, that by bolstering up your forces and reinforcing your front, you are going to make victory more likely, because you are exhausting the enemy. But moving away from the humanitarian side that Padme eventually mentions during her speech later on in the second episode of the arc, moving away from that, there is the additional part that it is countered by an effort on the Separatist side to expand their military once they see that the Republic doesn't want to end the war. Once it is once it is made clear that the Republic doesn't want to end the war, or at the very least, once the vote to end the war is sabotaged by Dooku and by Palpatine. And that's something that we'll talk about later for people that don't quite know the details of this arc like that. Up in like from that moment onwards, the Separatists actually are kind of like, well, if the Republic doesn't want to negotiate, we'll have to expand the war and make our victory more likely by by getting more millions of droids themselves. So the Republic push to expand the effort and make victory more likely with their increased numbers of of clones is countered by the Separatists with their amount of droids that they're willing to add to the conflict as well. Um, and so what you see there is a failure of of war as a means of bringing about peace, as a means of promoting and and of promoting and restoring peace.
No, yeah.
Because yeah, if
Sorry, you
one
go.
side is willing to strengthen their side as a means of tipping on their side of victory, and therefore peace is restored, and the other side does the same thing, then you're just expanding the war. And at the same time, as this is happening, right, somewhat contradictory, there are people within each government that is willing to negotiate peace. And it is shocking actually to see how close they get to coming to peace. And that's something that I believe I talked about in the last couple of minutes before we cut out last time. But now we have the opportunity to expand on that more, is that this arc as a whole validates negotiation. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's the importance in politics is that, the only time you come to victory is through cooperation, right? That's the important about global system in becoming, in promoting cooperation between nations. And what this episode really showed was at first the lack of trust between the two sides, right? It takes a senator representative such as Amidala who believes in bipartisanship, right? She believes that separatists aren't bad because we're introduced to a Senate that is full of people, Jedi's that are full of distrust towards the separatists who don't believe peace is possible because they blame the other side. They do this blame game, and we see this result in sort of an arms race, like we've seen during the Cold War, where both superpowers didn't trust each other at all, and every time another country would increase their military, they would do the same in response, where peace kind of seemed inevitable, as an impossible option, right? Only war. And Amidala shows kind of a peaceful resolution would only be through bipartisanship. And when they do, when they start negotiating with each other and trusting each other, because trust is a big thing here. Amidala and Bonteri used to be her mentor back on Naboo, right? So that's somebody she absolutely trusts. Even the chancellor asked her, like, how are you sure of this? How can you trust separatism? It's like, no, I have my friend. We're basically like family on the other side. And whilst they have disagreements, right? She thinks Count Dooku is, a brilliant leader. We all know he's a Sith, right? Even Jedi's have respect for him, but the Senate distrusts him. They don't trust him, and it really highlights that in this case that militarization won't lead to peace, only negotiation. So it is very tragic to see that this bill fails to really lead to anything more than almost peace. We're very close to it. And leading on to the episode, right? We see that in the end the bill fails and it goes back to biggering sides, polarization where both sides hate each other, and Amidala must move to the defensive to stop this 5 million clone bill from passing the Senate, because obviously the both sides end up, throwing away these peace negotiations and returning back to these bitter
Wait,
partisan beliefs.
but
Yeah.
look, why don't you explain why, like the details of why the Republic, of why peace like can't happen? Like what happened and where and why what led to Padme and Bonteri's peace negotiation option falling through? What happened to that?
Yes. So, I touched on earlier how the separatists were former members of the Republic Senate. However, they believe that the Republic is corrupt. They actually criticize that corporations basically mingle in the politics of the Republic as part of the reason why it's corrupt. And truthfully, they're right. The chancellor is corrupt, right? He's a Sith. However, what they don't come to realize is that they themselves are also corrupt because of Count Dooku, who is just a puppet for Palpatine. So, you know, peace is not an option in this case when you're being meddled with by a Sith Lord. And whilst they still believe, they still have hope, both of them, they have a drink later on where they cheers and say to peace, and Amidala responds to hope, because they believe that through negotiation, right, corruptness aside, that they can actually achieve something, even though they both believe each other's side to be wrong, corrupt, false, just increasing that their interest, both parties' interests are just feeding into the war. But that belief in hope and bipartisanship to a degree to come to a common resolution is the only thing driving those peace negotiations. But later on, when obviously these peace negotiations don't end up working out, they have to go to the defensive side, right? Bail Organa and Amidala spearhead the defensive in the Senate to stop this bill from passing, basically. And she goes back to basically they do the good old fashioned thing of whipping votes, right? Swaying votes one way. And she comes to a senator, not this one, but another one from Moncala, and he's a Quarren, and he's actually in support of this clone funding bill to increase war efforts of a means to restore peace. However, he says that what he's doing is the best interest of his people, but she reminds him, because one of the critiques of the Senate is that it's so far, and they all live on Coruscant, basically. They're not in touch with their people. And we've touched on it before with Ryloth, right? Where they believe their senator is not in touch with the people. And Amidala reflects where she's talking to one of her workers and goes back to the idea that, their jobs as representatives is to represent the people. And all this discussions has actually been, the biggest takeaway she gets is that this bill is actually not only gonna increase the war, but take away resources from other sectors such as education, welfare, and how the Senate has been clouded with this need, like this over focus on war, right? This whole discussion, because all they do is really debate war and the economics of war, rather than how the people, how their representatives are, the people they representative are actually doing, because they're the ones who should actually be the main focus of the Republic, not this war against another group who actually doesn't even want this war, as we find out. So that goes back to how corrupt the system really is. And she eventually actually comes to realize and talks to people, which a lot of politicians doesn't, a lot of representatives don't do. She ends up having this speech, which we found very touching. And I think you had a lot to say about the speech, didn't you, Khalil?
Yeah, because Padme here, when she gives this speech, there is something about it that is um she makes any opposition, like any other, like any good speech, she makes any opposition look stupid as soon as she delivers it. Because we were talking about how this was a public speech, about how people knew about it, like people that are outside of Senate procedures, outside of Senate life, um, people going about their lives. They go up and like they just are going about their lives, and they see the hologram of Padme giving that speech, and suddenly they realize that there are senators that speak for them, because it is a rather popular belief in most planets, and Coruscant is one of them, even being the capital of the Republic, that their senators don't really represent them. Very few people from very few planets actually believe that that their um their senators like represent them. We saw that with the first episode we did here on Star Wars Politics with that, I don't know the name of the planet, but in that second episode of Tales of the Jedi, when Count Dooku, when he noticed well, then Master Dooku, when he noticed the that senator, and how he was being unjust, and how he wasn't representing the people, how he was bankrupting the people, and just selling his planet out to outside
Hmm.
corporations at the detriment of his constituents. And so it's a very popular belief of the Senate, that the Senate and their senators don't represent them, that the system is corrupt, that no matter which way you vote, they're always going to get in somehow. It's just there's a lot of despair, but
Yeah.
but in most of the speeches given during the Senate procedure are probably speeches that, if you're a senator giving that speech, you would not want your constituents to know about it. Um, there were a lot of times during these proceedings, and where senators said things that they would not be proud of. Um, but then out of nowhere, Padme gives this lion of a speech, um, and I get the sense that this was cut off of a regular program, because of the fact that if you take a look very carefully, um, everybody in this shot is standing up. Nobody is nobody is um wait, go back, Luca. Um, everybody everybody is standing up, um, and as you can see, you get the idea that not only is this speech a very good one, and therefore everyone is kind of like like out, like on the edge of their seat, like standing up, giving like
Hmm.
standing ovations, giving attention to the speech, but also because there's a certain shock, because you get the idea that whoever was like leading the broadcast of Senate procedures, they just recognized that what she was saying was so truthful that it needed to be
Hmm.
brought to people.
Yeah.
And so that is one thing that you can like notice about this shot, is that nobody is sitting down. And so it kind of goes to say like how important the speech is that she's giving, because in this speech she says that people that the Senate doesn't care about the people anymore, about how they're trying to use victory to bring about peace and restore peace. They're not
Yeah.
caring about the food security, about the health security of their people. Um, when, as she says, almost quote for quote, that this war was meant to decrease suffering, not increase it.
Yeah.
So, so
Yeah.
she really rallies the Senate, and she rallies the people. That's why, as you see, as soon as everybody's giving their standing ovations in the Senate, and I bet also out in the crowds around the galaxy, because this was displayed, I imagine, not just throughout Coruscant, but anywhere with a broadcast speaker like this. Um, that in the Senate at the very least, you see senators that were disagreeing with her, people that were part of the opposition. They were kind of um begrudgingly giving their own like standing ovation,
Hmm.
because they knew that she just defeated them completely. She knew that there
Yeah.
was that, you know. she clowned him.
Yeah,
But
no.
it wasn't just in this speech, because in this speech, what's crazy about this is that as important as the speech was, it was not to end the war, and that might be the one thing that kind of weakens the position that negotiation and diplomacy is the way to end war. Um, that's the one thing about this arc that might weaken that position, because the this speech, as important as it was, all it did was to stop more troops, more clone troops from being added to the fight.
Hmm.
Um, and of course,
But
there are a lot of consequences to that. That means that people like have more health security, more food security within the Republic. But the but this wasn't to end the war, because the any chance to end the war had been thrown out as soon as
mhm.
as soon um as the peace
I would,
negotiations were sabotaged by Palpatine. Because
yeah,
actually,
no,
the parliament, the separatist parliament, they voted in favor of peace, and then news of that got to the Republic Senate, and they were going to vote to restore peace and uh and continue to go and just like end the war.
yeah,
And right before the votes of that decision came by, there was a bomb that was set by separatist droids that were sent by Dooku at by order of Palpatine. So Palpatine told Dooku to to
manipulate basically.
yeah, to send over separatist droids to Coruscant, bomb the power grid of the planet, so that the results of that vote would not be seen. And then it
Yeah,
was that bombing of Coruscant that that rallied a position of pro-war,
yeah,
when likely
it
the
yeah,
vote from that from the vote from the Republic would have been in favor to end the war. So it was
yeah,
so close to restoring peace at that moment in season three.
yeah,
And so it kind of waters down the speech a little bit, but it's still
yeah.
important.
No, yeah, I think what even further waters down the speech is that it gives people hope, and it shows that that there's good in the Senate, which obviously there is no, that it's still corrupt. And the fact that is overshadowed by this speech is that the separatists are still going to invest 3 million droids, and that's just going to lead to the Republic having to answer to that, because obviously that goes back to the arms race, where they're just going to have to you know get more clones eventually, no matter the outcome of this vote. It'll be reintroduced and will pass, and throughout the seasons we'll obviously see that this leads down a dark path. And another thing of this speech is that I really, like you already mentioned, she's addressing the people. We don't get these. Usually we just spend time in the Senate, right? It's a closed out building, right? Full of elitist representatives of planets. And end up, what they do is basically make decisions on behalf of so many planets, so many people, so many lives of people that end up suffering and dying because of the decisions made in this Senate. And I feel a lot of people, we see this down the line, they not only lost faith in the Senate, and a lot of senators, right? Like we see in Ryloth with Syndulla, but also in the Jedi, because I think another piece that isn't really mentioned is the Jedi's role as peacekeepers during these negotiations. This is a very important negotiation, right? This is instrumental to actually, in theory, stopping the war from happening. It's the first step. However, Jedi's have no say in this, right? They were only implemented as soldiers in this case. They had no part of peace negotiations. I mean, what message would it have sent out if Jedi's went to the neutral planets as peacekeepers and started negotiations? Because they are the symbols of the Republic for peace, right? They're known as the peacekeepers. If senators, Jedi's would have met with the separatists, that would have been a big step forward. Obviously, we won't see this because this bill is obviously the peace negotiations stopped, and it goes all back to partisanship and polarization and the blame game and trying to link the opposition to things just for political gain and power. So yeah, overall, this speech, even though it was a beautiful one, it actually did, I think, more harm than good because in the end, it it kind of romanticizes the outcome, which is that they're still going to get more clones. We don't actually see the I don't believe we see the result of the vote. Actually, it ends with the speech, right?
Yeah, it
And
ends
this
with the speech.
thunderous applause.
Everybody's
Hmm.
clapping in the Senate. We're led to believe that the speech was enough to turn the motion against doing so,
Yeah,
to that the motion was struck down to add more clones. We're led to believe that.
yeah.
Um,
But it ends with Emperor Palpatine saying, let the wheels of the Senate turn. You know,
yeah, but right before he said that, like he said, there was in that scene. It was a very interesting scene. Um,
where he
oh,
says the outcome doesn't matter, right? That's what he kind of alludes to. It doesn't
yeah, but
matter
I
what
think he
happens in the
said that.
Senate; it's corrupt.
Yeah, he said that because Mazameda, his Senate consultant, his chancellor's consultant,
Blue
yeah, the blue
devil.
guy, yeah, Mazameda, he said to him something along the lines of like unfortunate, unfortunate that
Yeah, he
this.
says. You know what he says? I remember now. He says it's amazing. You can have all the power in the galaxy, yet the voice of a simple senator, holds so much weight. Something along
Right.
those lines, right?
So I
That's what he
think
says.
we're led to believe from that the motion was struck down.
Yeah, you reckon?
Yeah.
I think it was a real Palpatine. He's more amused by it because he knows what's going to happen, right? He's too brilliant, but I think he has like sublime respect for Amidala for what she's done because she is truly the only senator who actually bothers in a way to even believe in democracy and the Senate can actually hold some good. She actually believes in the people.
She's one of very
Uh,
few people in the Senate that actually care.
mhm.
And some would say that she's an elitist position. Some would say that she's not too much different
Yeah,
than
she's a champagne socialist,
yeah,
basically. I think that's what people say.
Senator Mon Mothma, very similar in that way, or Bail Organa. They all have good intentions, but they're still in the same elitist position, some say.
Yeah.
And so it kind of clouds our view. But we have very little time left. We might expand more on this idea a little bit more later. We don't know exactly which direction we might go. I'm thinking maybe Saga